Hi everybody, this is Everyday Commentary, and this is a video overview of this knife. This knife is the Theseus edition of the Emerson Mini A-100, and that's a little bit of a joke for those of you that are familiar with Greek history and Greek philosophy. The ship of Theseus was an example that was given to talk about what keeps an object as the same object. And the story is that over time, as the ship was at war, they replaced every single part of the ship while they were out at sea. They replaced the mast, they replaced all the boards, so that the ship that came back had none of the same parts as the ship that left, but it was still the ship of Theseus. And while this knife has not been through that quite a dramatic transformation, it has had a lot of work done to it, and it has made this knife a substantially better knife, in my opinion. First of all, let's talk about the knife that it started out as, the Mini A-100. This is the second generation of the Mini A-100. Instead of that fiber backspacer, this one actually has standoffs. It also has the double detent system that's common on newer Emersons. So there's a detent here with the lock bar, but there's also another detent. You can see it right there. And that just helps keep the blade centered and lined up and everything working smoothly. I've had this knife for about a year, and I've had a couple of changes done to it. I'm going to go through and talk about those and tell you why I like this knife better than I did before. And the first thing you need to know is that the Mini A-100 is one of my favorite knife designs ever. It's very simple. It is a very sturdy, robust knife. It always works. The CPM or the 154 CM steel that Emerson uses is a pretty darn good steel. It's not as good as a high-end steel that you can get today. It's not as good as a powder steel, but it still works quite well. The two things that I didn't really like about the knife before were I did not like the overly aggressive G10 texture, and I did not like the chisel bevel. So there's two kinds of grinds that you find on an Emerson. There's one where it's a full chisel grind where it's only sharpened on one side, and then this side when you flip it over it's completely flat. And then there's ones where it's a chisel bevel. So this is a typical V-grind knife in the sense that it's ground on this side and it's ground on this side. But on this knife, before I had it modified, the actual cutting bevel was only sharpened on one side. And while it's not as difficult to use, especially when you're registering cuts, as a chisel ground, full chisel grind knife, it's still not quite as easy to deal with as a regular ground knife. And so what I did was, about a year ago, I sent it out to Spade Knife Works, and he put on his patented mirror finish, and he reprofiled the blade, so now it has a bevel on both sides. He also crowned the spine so that it was a little smoother up here. But I asked him to keep the swedge because I like the look of the swedge. The end result is a very refined blade. It doesn't have quite the pronounced beard as it did before, but it is an excellent cutter. It is a very, very good performing knife. I really like the change, and I think that it makes it easier to sharpen and easier to use. So that was the first major change, to crown the spine here, as you can see, and then to put a grind on both sides. The second change was something that I had to track down. I tracked down a person that does Emerson modifications, and I had to modify, or I had to change the scales. Instead of the really aggressive black G10 texture, this knife now has a very smooth gray G10 texture. And as you can see, it has a little bit of contouring. And that means that this knife just really sings in the hand. The other thing that he did is he added this cutout so your thumb can hit the thumb disc easier. It wasn't a problem before, but it makes it just that much nicer. And really, this knife, as it is now, is about as close to the ideal pocket knife as I could think of, if you're looking for something that's robust and durable that you don't have to worry about, but at the same time is refined enough that you could carry it in any sort of setting. By making it the smaller of the two, it's not something that's going to scare people, but it still has that Emerson feel to it. The other thing that's important to me is that I'm never going to modify a knife that's an Emerson to make it look like an Emerson custom. A while back, there were people that were doing what are called po' boy modifications, where they would take and do the green micarta and then the titanium bolsters. And they looked a lot like Ernie's custom knives. And I'm just never going to have an Emerson that's modified to look like that. If I want to get a knife that looks like that, I'll buy a custom from Ernie, or I'm not going to get it. And so I tried to steer clear of anything that looks like a custom Emerson by doing this. I had this out when they released the Prometheus Design Works that have the grooves, and so I do think the gray may be a little close, but this was something that I had planned long before those came out. So that was just a coincidence. But I will never modify an Emerson to look like an Emerson custom because I just don't want to do that. It's not cool in my opinion. And Ernie actually went on USN and asked people to stop. So that's not going to happen. Just a real quick point of comparison so everybody knows. This is what the knife looks like compared to a Benchmade mini grip. And you can see they're pretty similar in size. The mini grip is a little smaller. The blade lengths match up pretty close because the mini grip just does a great job of hiding its blade length. So you can see there, they're pretty close. So these are two classics. This knife is a classic, and in fact, it really fills the role that like a small Sabenza would fill in my collection. I want something that's nice and rugged, but a little refined, I'll drop this in my pocket. I carry this all the time, though it usually resides in my nightstand next to my HDS rotary. They make a really great light and saber pair. So that was my Theseus edition Emerson Mini A-100.